Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, from where you're joining us. I welcome you to the webinar on building resilience, inclusive growth, and holistic transformation in Sri Lanka. This webinar is jointly organized by the International Food Policy Research Institute and the CGIAR Impact Area Platform for Poverty Reduction, Livelihoods, and Jobs. The International Food Policy Research Institute, IFPRI, is a research center of the CGIAR. My name is Olivier Ecker. I'm Senior Research Fellow at IFPRI, based in IFPRI's headquarters in Washington, D.C., and I'm delighted to chair this webinar and moderate the discussions later on. I would like to kindly ask you to keep your microphone muted and your video off throughout this webinar. And I would also like to ask you to kindly provide your first and your last name, as well as your institutional affiliation in your Zoom name tag. You can change your name by clicking at the participants button at the bottom of your screen, and then you can modify your names on the right-hand side in the participants window. For asking questions, please use the Q&A function of the Zoom, which you can also find at the bottom of your screen when you hover over it. And in your message, please provide your name, your institutional affiliation, from where you join us, and whom you address your question to. We collect those questions throughout the webinar, and then later on in our Q&A session, we will ask these questions to our speakers. This webinar is recorded. I hope everybody of you is fine with it. The edited recording will be available from IFPRI's and CGIAR's website in a few days. Without further ado, I would like to hand over the mic to Dr. Jean Ballier. Jean Ballier is Director of the CGIAR Poverty Reduction, Livelihoods, and Jobs Impact Area Platform, and he's based in France. He previously served as the CGIAR's Regional Director for the Southeast and Pacific region and as the Director General of the International Rice Research Institute, IFPRI, another CGIAR research center. Jean, the floor is yours.
All right. Thank you, Olivier. Thank you very much for this brief introduction. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you. Welcome to this webinar on the BRIGHT project, Building Resilience, Inclusive Growth, and Holistic Transformation in Sri Lanka. This is, as Olivier said, a joint webinar of IFPRI and the CGIAR Community of Practice on Poverty, Livelihoods, and Jobs. And I'm, of course, delighted about this collaboration. And I want to take this opportunity to thank the whole IFPRI team. And even more, if I may, our partners in Sri Lanka, including many local institutions, but also the World Bank, WFP, who are joining us today on this remarkable collaboration already within the framework of this impact area on poverty. So today we'll be talking about the BRIGHT project, and this survey is, in my opinion, and you will see why, it is a groundbreaking initiative to address the data gap in understanding Sri Lanka's complex challenges, including many facets of poverty, inequality, and the consequences of economic shocks. So why is the BRIGHT project important, in my opinion? Many low and middle income countries face multiple shocks: economic, political, food price, geopolitical, climate change crisis. And these shocks threaten poverty, make poverty reduction more difficult, achieving zero hunger more challenging, making inclusive and sustainable economic growth and transformation more difficult. So it is both extremely difficult, as I said, and crucial to address these challenges through effective pro-poor policies. Yet, reliable data is often scarce. And we need high-quality, high-frequency data to do better policy work. And this BRIGHT project fills this gap. By providing high-quality, high-frequency data, the surveys captures rapid change by monitoring short-term fluctuations in welfare, livelihoods, diets, and exposure to shocks. It proposes, and that's very important too, methodological innovations with innovative survey techniques. It also empowers Sri Lankan and other researchers to conduct and analyze such surveys. And it is, in my opinion, a promising platform for future research and thorough policy discussions on the situation in Sri Lanka. But beyond data collection analysis, BRIGHT is also the promise to impact. While collected high-quality data is crucial, it is equally important to ensure that this data is used to inform policy in the right policy circles, and that decision makers can make effective and design effective intervention. As you know, Sri Lanka has faced a severe economic crisis not too long ago, with a poverty reduction trend reversal between 2020 and 2023, after at least a decade of decline, substantial decline in poverty. This context highlights the need for timely and accurate data to guide government decisions. And CGIAR is committed to supporting Sri Lanka and other countries' development by generating rigorous research and providing evidence-based solutions for better policies. We hope that the BRIGHT survey will contribute to a more prosperous and equitable future for Sri Lanka, of course. And there are various reasons that I want to highlight, 4 reasons why I think this webinar is a tremendous opportunity for those who could participate and join us today. It will help us understand how we can tackle critical knowledge gaps and improve methods on poverty analysis. It is also important for research to gain new insights on how to answer some essential questions related to the impact of economic shocks on households, their well-being and their resilience, but also on the role of agriculture in responding to these shocks, agriculture and the extended food systems, of course. And it could also serve as a reference for similar intervention in other countries, where the approach could be replicated and possibly expanded. So it is also an opportunity, and this is the final point, to hear from our country partners about their needs, their interest, their expectation for this collaboration. Today, we are honored and pleased to host guests from Sri Lanka, representing both the academia and influential policy circles. Their partnership on the importance and the innovations that this BRIGHT project brings is invaluable to us. And their active engagement already demonstrates their belief in the project's potential to address critical issues around poverty in that country. In the next few minutes, we will delve deeper into the survey design and how it can benefit policymaking for the BRIGHT community in Sri Lanka, and how we could think about a brighter future for Sri Lanka. I hope you will find this webinar useful, informative, and engaging. I look forward to the discussion, and I thank you very much for your attention.
Jean, thank you very much for these kind opening remarks. I would like now to hand over to Dr. Derek Hady and Dr. Joanna Van Asselt for their presentation on the BRIGHT Sri Lanka survey. Derek is a senior research fellow and Joanna is an associate research fellow with IFPRI. Both are based in Sri Lanka and lead the implementation of the BRIGHT survey. Please, as a reminder to all participants here, please mute your mic and keep your video turned off. Derek, over to you, please.
Thank you, Olivier. So I'm just going to go and share a screen so we can go ahead and start. Where is my... So I hope everyone can see my screen, and I also wanted to extend my thanks to everyone for joining. It's great to have so much participation on what I think is a very promising and important project. So as mentioned, BRIGHT stands for Building Resilience, Inclusive Growth, and Holistic Transformation. And it's an integrated or multi-purpose, multi-thematic survey of Sri Lanka being conducted right now. So a quick introduction. Maybe you've heard this quote before, but I really like it. In God we trust, all others bring data. by W. Edwards Deming. And another one, if you can't measure something, you can't understand it. If you can't understand it, you can't control it. If you can't control it, you can't improve it. And H. James Harrington was not an economist, but this could very well apply to economic policy. And I think Sri Lanka's recent history demonstrates that. So why does Sri Lanka need data? Sri Lanka is on a bumpy road to recovery from the worst economic crisis it's experienced since independence. Sometimes called a polycrisis. It was a financial crisis, a fuel crisis, electricity, a food crisis. And in 2022, inflation hit 70%. As Jean mentioned, the poverty rate doubled at the $3.65 per day poverty line. We've seen rising child malnutrition and mortality, which is very sad. We saw this rapid decline in yields of rice by about 30 to 40% in 2021 and 22, largely due to the ban on fertilizer imports, which was really motivated by shortages of foreign exchange. And we've seen massive livelihood disruptions and accelerated emigration overseas. We've also seen major reforms. So a crisis is always opportunity for reform and a structural adjustment process supported by the IMF and the World Bank. We've just had elections finished. We have a new government formed in Sri Lanka. And actually that was the first day of the new parliament today. So quite a special day in Sri Lanka's economic history. And with that comes elevated demand for economic reforms and new investment strategies, and hopefully elevated demand for new evidence and stronger evidence use in policymaking. So I want to start by talking about this polycrisis and the bumpy road to recovery. I think it's worth having some vivid reminders of just how bad this crisis was. I've been based in Sri Lanka for 3 years. And so these scenes you can barely imagine, but this was everyday life for about 2 months. These incredible fuel lines. My own tuk-tuk driver I used to go to work in Badramula would spend literally 3 days in his tuk-tuk, buy 5 liters of fuel. That was enough for 1 day's work. And then he'd go back in line for another 3 days. So he was virtually sleeping in his tuk-tuk for 6 weeks. And so it was an astonishing fuel crisis, but also an electricity crisis, a gas crisis. Before that, during COVID, you can see the masks here. There was this incredible ban on imports of fertilizers. That actually happened the week I moved to Sri Lanka, and I thought I was misreading the news because I really couldn't imagine an Asian country so focused on rice banning fertilizers when, you know, rice has been bred, as John would well know, for the last 50 years or more to absorb more fertilizer. So, and then on the right, you'll see this, 35% drop in yields from 2021 to 2022. And then, of course, there was massive protests that sparked regime change, and they went on. And then we had the appeal to the IMF and the World Bank. And now what we've seen in terms of statistics, are now turning to the data, we are starting to see turning the corner on a macroeconomic front. So we're seeing economic growth recovery. Growth rates bottomed out at -13% in the fourth quarter of 2022, but they're now hitting 5% in the first quarter of 2024. And there are some signs, you can see on the ground of some economic recovery, certainly tourism, a little bit of uptick in construction and other sectors as well. Inflation is certainly down from those massive peaks in 2022. And that inflation, was kind of inflation in everything. Food prices rose very sharply, particularly the most nutritious and healthy foods. And there were also severe shortages in some cases, but also utilities, electricity, and a wide range of imported goods, of course, because of the depreciation of the exchange rate. So inflation is now in single digits. However, this is a story you often hear. Everyone is trying to leave, right? So lots of people trying to leave. There's very low confidence. Many Sri Lankans say, I just don't think there's a bright future here. They're trying to leave. And if more people could leave, they would leave. And one of the things we'll do in this survey is asking about intentions to migrate, steps taken to migration, for example, because we know there's a lot of latent demand for migration. So that's the blue bars there. So a lot of people leaving every single month. On the plus side, remittances are going up. On the downside, there's brain drain, and there could be labor shortages in a number sectors, and indeed, I think there are already. So, some macroeconomic recovery, but at the individual and household level, I think the picture is much worse. So this is, I want to report here on incomes and poverty. The best way to measure poverty in the absence of high-frequency surveys is looking at trends in real wages. And that's what this graph shows, trends in real wages for skilled labor, manual labor for men. So this is like carpenters, that's the orange line. And then unskilled labor for men, this is like assistant carpenters or masons in construction. And then right at the bottom, tea plucking in the estate sector by women, that's the green line. So what you see in early 2022, sort of the second quarter of 2022, is that real wages fell by 25 to 30%, really just in a few months. And that was because of the inflation that was experienced. And what we've seen is that real wages are not really recovering, or recovering by a very small amount. And as of July 2024, a few months ago, real wages are still 25% below pre-crisis levels. So, just imagine that if tomorrow your employer said, I'm going to take away a quarter of your income, and I'm going to do that for 2 or 3 years, right? So that's a really severe shock. And what we also see from this is something else more structural, really low wages in the estate sector, and that's where the poorest communities are in Sri Lanka, large male-female wage gaps, and not shown here, but shown in a recent World Bank report, which I encourage everyone to read, from October, declining female labor force participation, which is intriguing. And these are also numbers from the World Bank report showing their projections, microsimulations of poverty at both the $3.65 per day poverty line in 2017 dollars and the $6.85. So Sri Lanka was an upper middle income country. And you can see, if you just look at the lower middle income poverty rate, it's gone from 13% estimated in 2021 to 25, 26% in 2023. So basically doubled, and really it virtually doubled in the space of just 1 year in 2022. So a stunning increase in poverty. Sri Lanka is well known for having a very strong public health system, and that includes really strong nutrition monitoring through their public health midwives, coordinated by the Ministry of Health. So we're sort of fortunate in having very high frequency data on the nutritional situation in Sri Lanka, but it's pretty grim. The percentage of children underweight increased, this is under 5, increased by 4.2 percentage points from 13.2 to 17.3%. But that's actually a 30% increase in proportional terms. So, really stunning increase. And it happened, really quite quickly, as you can see there, in 2022 and the first half of 2023. And we're still not seeing much recovery yet. There's also massive variation across districts, from a low of 11% in Colombo to 25% in Nueria, which is a predominantly estate population. So in the tea estates, around a quarter of children are underweight and a similar proportion stunted. So a very grim situation there. And then Sri Lanka also has good statistics on child mortality. And, from very low levels, because of this strong public health system, under 5 mortality rate has risen from 9.3 children dying per 1,000 to 12.5. That's still low by, say, sub-Saharan African standards, but it just shows you that this crisis is taking a toll on mortality as well as malnutrition and morbidity. And there's also anecdotal evidence of growing problems with substance abuse, including alcohol and drug abuse, and declining mental health and suicides. And Sri Lanka's health sector is struggling. They've had serious loss of staff because of immigration, so kind of brain drain, lack of funding because of the fiscal problems, and at the hospital level and clinic level, lack of basic medicines and treatments, and really high prices from the private sector providers. So people with serious health problems are really quite desperate. So we're also seeing these, dramatic changes in Sri Lanka's economy, but its society, its demography through migration, and its polity. And that brings us to the Bright survey, which I think is well timed. And part of the impetus for this is in March this year, the Sri Lankan Prime Minister requested CGIAR support for economic revival in rural villages and households, including innovations that integrate livelihoods, food and nutrition security and resilience. So that's language directly from the Prime Minister's office. And fortunately, Jean, had the great idea, I think, of reaching out to us and really taking advantage of the opportunity to do this survey in Sri Lanka, a country that really needs more data, more evidence, and more evidence in policymaking specifically. And it couldn't be more apt in a sense because Sri Lanka has no regular large-scale agricultural surveys, certainly multi-thematic surveys. It has no large-scale open access panel surveys. And it, at the national level through the government, only infrequently collects national cross-sectional surveys such as the HIS, the Household Income Expenditure Survey, and the DHS, the Demographic Health Survey. And the last HIS was conducted in 2019 before the crisis, and of course the country's changed fundamentally. But even then, these existing surveys like the HIS or DHS, they have a fundamental problem. They cannot join the dots. So they can tell us, for example, what the poverty rate is, but not do that much to explain poverty. Or they can tell us what the malnutrition rate is, but not do so much to explain it. But most economic, social, and public health problems are really complex, right? So the point here is measuring poverty is not the same as understanding its causes. And I'm just picking poverty as one example. So really understanding these complex household and individual economic problems requires complex household economic surveys. And that's where BRIGHT comes in. BRIGHT is a complex multi-thematic household survey. And as Jean said, in 2024, IFPRI was funded by the CGIAR Community of Practice on Poverty Reduction, Livelihoods and Jobs Impact Area to do a multi-thematic national survey in Sri Lanka. And our immediate goal is to create a high-quality, multi-thematic, open access survey. But we also want to try and foster what we've called a kind of data research impact institution. And we're not going to do this by ourselves, obviously. And the reason we mentioned those three things is obviously it has to start with data, all right? And so, we're doing our bit with providing a free open access survey to crowd in research on a really wide range of topics, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. And then that, that crowds in that research, not only by the CGIAR, but by Sri Lankan and international students and researchers, government agencies, NGOs, and development partners. And then that's where we get to the next step to impact, as Jean said, by working with local and international partners. And one thought we had, we're trying to promote is a kind of policy dialogue seminars in 2025. And those would bring together researchers, policymakers, civil society, private sector, and we publish policy briefs around those as well. In terms of the future, we also want to flag the potential and importance of future BRIGHT surveys. So as we said, we think BRIGHT should be a panel, right? It should be conducted every 2 to 3 years to monitor economic recovery in multiple forms of welfare, not just poverty, and impacts of new policies and programs, because there are many such new policies and programs underway. And then we highlight another opportunity too. We could do BRIGHT subsample surveys, right? We can access this large database and resurvey households to explore specific themes. We could do agricultural subsample surveys or surveys on migration or nutrition or digital innovations, et cetera, et cetera. So I want to end by saying a big thank to BRIGHT's many partners. This is certainly not an IFPRI alone effort or a CGIAR alone effort. And I want to really thank these partners because they have been working under huge pressure, right? We've had to get this survey into the field very quickly, and it's been a huge amount of work. So there's the IFPRI team named here, but also this is a partnership with the International Water Management Institute, who's supported several modules and been a great help. Dr. Nalini Hemachandra from University of Peradeniya we'll hear from in a few minutes, as well as Professor Renuka Silva from Wayamba University. Immacolata Ranucci, a PhD student at the University of Florence, and Vivian Holson below have worked something like 14 hours a day, 7 days a week for months now, along with others, and Hilmi Ishak, an agricultural expert. And we also have several visiting PhD students from the University of Göttingen in Germany who are helping out and hoping to do their PhD theses, at least partly, on this survey. And a big thanks also to Candy Consulting Group. They're our survey implementer, led by Mr. Damaka Herath. They're in the field now and doing great work, and the data is coming in and will be available pretty soon. And of course, also our consultations with a lot of Sri Lankan experts and development partner agencies have given us good ideas and feedback. So I'm going to turn over to Joanna now. Joanna, I'll still manage the slides for you, but please do kick in when you're ready.
Okay. All right, great. Hopefully everyone can hear me. So I'm going to talk to everyone a little bit about BRIGHT more specifically and share some details of our survey, including the sampling design, the sampling frame, and some important innovations in the survey design and within the survey modules. Next slide, please. So a little bit about our BRIGHT sample design. The survey is intended to be representative of Sri Lanka, but at the province level, at the rural, urban, and estate levels as well. So Sri Lanka has 9 provinces, and each province is further divided into districts. So there are 25 districts, and within those 25 districts, Sri Lanka is then further divided into 331 divisions. So basically for our sample frame, we took the 331 divisions and we randomly selected about half of them, 176, which allows us to have a really wide geographic spread across Sri Lanka. And within those 176 divisions, we've selected randomly 280 GNs. We oversample from coastal GNs, so we can have a robust sample of fishers, and we also oversample in urban and estate areas. And this sampling method, as I've stressed, allows us to have a very geographically spread sample and also be representative at the national, province, urban, rural, and estate levels. So to make sure that our survey is representative, we used estimates from the most recent Sri Lankan census, which was conducted in 2012. And we set up quotas within each province for each district, so for the 25 districts, and also for urban, rural, and estate areas. So the sample size for the survey is 6,500, and 20% of the survey is expected in urban areas, 73% in rural areas, and 8% in estate areas. This method yields a minimum sample of 382 at the province level, so quite large, as well as a sample of 500 households for the estate sector. And this 500 households, the estate sector is historically understudied, so it will allow us to do a lot of rigorous analysis on the estate sector. Next slide, please. So why a multi-thematic survey? A multi-thematic survey is highly valuable because it enables researchers and policymakers, so us in this discussion, to draw connections across a broad spectrum of welfare indicators. Welfare outcomes are inherently interlinked with various dimensions influencing and reinforcing each other. By incorporating multiple modules within a single survey, covering both household-level data and individual-level responses from 2 members, we can gain deeper insights into both the intra-household dynamics and also the interconnected drivers between the modules of the key welfare challenges such as poverty, malnutrition, and social inequality. Next slide, please. For example, malnutrition could plausibly be a function of all these dots, including food consumption, water, sanitation, housing conditions, agricultural productivity, gender dynamics, and so on. And all of this will be captured in the BRIGHT survey. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to talk about some specific innovations in BRIGHT. Next slide, please. So here I'm showing an example of the survey flow for a household with a male and female respondent. And in this slide, you can see some of the survey innovations. So first, in orange, we have randomized the subjective well-being module. So both female and male respondents receive the module at 3 different points in the survey. Second, we have duplicated several modules for both female and male respondents and for households with multiple respondents of the same gender as well. This includes the module on employment, where the man responds for himself, and the the female respondent responds for herself as well as all of the other household members. And here we are already seeing huge discrepancies in the results between men and women reporting employment. Third, we have a women's empowerment module where both respondents answer questions on empowerment. And finally, we have a debt and saving module where both respondents answer questions on their own savings. Next slide, please. So other innovations include a farming module designed at the crop level. Questions are asked by crop for the 5 most important crops by season. The crops then link back to the plots. Since fertilizer is an important topic for Sri Lanka, as Derek pointed to, given the recent ban on imports, questions on fertilizer are asked both at the crop level, but also by fertilizer type in a fertilizer-specific module. Within the agricultural module, we have also included an innovative submodule on extension designed to capture the information received from different sources of extension, including in-person and digital, and a tool designed to measure digital inclusiveness or the ability to access, participate in, and use digital tools for agricultural extension. Finally, the agricultural module also includes a Sri Lankan-specific module on adaptation to climate change, designed to capture specific climate adaptations that the government has trained on. Further, we have 2 versions of both a water security scale and an energy security scale. These modules test 2 versions of scales designed to measure access and quality of water and energy. Finally, we have a food away from home module that is designed to understand key issues with the measurement of food away from home. Half of the female respondents receive the module and answer questions on the food away from home consumed by the whole household, and then 1 question on how much their spouse consumes. The spouse also receives this module and answers about their individual consumption. Then vice versa for the other half of respondents, where the husband then estimates for the whole household, specifically for his wife, and the wife responds for herself. Next slide, please. We are working with Candy Consulting Firm, who have a presence across the country and a strong resume of work in Sri Lanka. We have thus far conducted 2 trainings, a master training, and pictured here an enumerator training with over 100 enumerators. Next slide, please. So the survey is underway, and here you can see a participant receiving a certificate for her participation in the survey, along with her token of appreciation. Next slide, please. So we just wanted to say, as Derek already stressed, that this is the beginning of BRIGHT and hopefully a collaborative future of research in Sri Lanka. So if you're interested in BRIGHT, please reach out to us. So thank you very much. And now I turn back over to Olivier for what will certainly be an interesting discussion on Sri Lanka. Thank you.
Derek, Joanna, thank you very much for this very insightful presentation, and we certainly look forward to have the data from the BRIGHT Sri Lanka survey coming in soon. So we will now come to a moderated expert panel discussion, and I'm really delighted to introduce 5 distinguished experts. The first expert is Dr. Nisha Ranoti-Lakke. Nisha is the Director of Research at the Institute of Policy Studies of Sri Lanka, IPS. IPS is a leading think tank in Sri Lanka on policy-related issues. Nisha is also a research fellow with the Partnership of Economic Policy, a Southern-led global organization dedicated to support development in the Global South. Our next speaker is Gerard Rebello. Gerard is the Deputy Country Director of the World Food Programme for Sri Lanka. Gerard is very experienced. Gerard has over 20 years of experience in logistics from various positions within WFP, but also from different private sector companies. Gerard, it is a pleasure to have you on the panel as well. Our third speaker is Dr. Nandini Krishnan. Nandini is the lead economist of the World Bank's Poverty and Equity Global Practice Group for the South Asia region. Nandini leads work on poverty, inequality, labor markets, and the distributional impacts of fiscal policy and climate change in India, Maldives, Nepal, and Sri Lanka, and hence she brings also the expertise from other countries to today's discussion. Our fourth speaker is Professor Dr. Renuka Silva. Renuka is Professor of Nutrition and the Chair of the Department of Applied Nutrition in the Faculty of Livestock, Fisheries and Nutrition at Wayamba University of Sri Lanka. Renuka served as the Dean of the Faculty from 2009 to 2012. He also served as the President of the Nutrition Society of Sri Lanka from 2011 to 2013, and he is a member of the Technical Advisory Committee of the National Nutrition Council. Renuka, pleasure to have you. Our fifth speaker is Dr. Delini Hemachandra. Delini is a senior lecturer with the Department of Agriculture, Economics and Business Management at the University of Peradeniya in Sri Lanka. Delini is an economist who specializes in applied research with a focus on issues related to agriculture productivity, land ownership, agriculture value chain development, food environments, and people's diet. Delini, welcome. So my first question goes to Nandini. Nandini, the last measurement, as also Derek has pointed out, of poverty in Sri Lanka was done in 2019 and before the pandemic and the recent economic crisis. But of course, the World Bank has been also very busy with trying to estimate poverty more recently. The World Bank has certainly undertaken major efforts to estimate poverty rates using, for example, several simulation tools to inform their programs as well as the general public, including in the areas of economic recovery and social protection. My first question to you is, how did poverty change since the crisis nationally and the different parts of Sri Lanka? Derek touched upon this briefly, but we would like to hear especially more from your perspective and perhaps more on the regional distribution of poverty. Over to you, Nandini.
Thanks, Olivier. It's a pleasure to be here speaking about such important issues. I think Derek spoke very eloquently about the data gaps and the need to have data, particularly in this time of repeated crisis, not only in Sri Lanka, but in the world. So as he said, the last available household income and expenditure survey in Sri Lanka, which is what is used to estimate national poverty rates, dates from 2019. It's now 5 years old, but in that interim, there's been COVID and also this massive economic shock. As you said, in the absence of new data to measure poverty, we've been using microsimulation techniques to estimate the projected impact of the economic crisis. And we're also thinking about other tools, but there's no substitute for data from the ground. So I think the Bright survey will be a huge, will fill a huge gap in this sense. So just a little bit about, I'll talk a little bit about the trends and the spatial distribution, and then maybe I'll talk a little bit about the microsimulation estimates and how we get to them, so you see what goes into those. So as Derek mentioned, Sri Lanka used to be an upper middle income country, but has now become a lower middle income country. So the norm we use is the $3.65 poverty line. And as he said, in a matter of a year and a half, poverty basically doubled from 13% to about 26%, increasing the number of poor people in Sri Lanka by 2.7 million. So that's a massive shock. And this eradicated almost a decade of poverty reduction. So 2023 is the highest estimated poverty rate for Sri Lanka since 2009. And what can be sort of wiped away very quickly is really hard to rebuild. And I think Sri Lanka is now sort of beginning that slow road back to economic recovery and improving welfare. So in some sense, the structure of poverty in Sri Lanka hasn't changed in terms of where the poorest people of Sri Lanka still live. So 80% of the poor still live in rural areas. Half the population in estate areas, though, is now living below the poverty line, this $3.65 poverty line. The big change was an increase in urban poverty. And I think everyone who's seen those images, who's lived through that, will resonate why that happened. So poverty in urban areas tripled from 5% to 15%. And that's primarily because the things that were hit hardest, the services industry, in terms of sectors of employment, And people who relied very heavily on fuel, for instance, their cost of living really shot up. Across districts, again, there's somewhat of a similar picture. Muletivu continues to be the poorest, followed by Kilinochchi, Nuwara Eliya, but the increase in poverty was the sharpest in Colombo. Now, I'll talk a little bit about microsimulation. It's terrible to begin a panel and talk about econometrics, but I'll try and make it a little intuitive. So what we try and do is we look at changes in employment in the three main sectors of the economy: agriculture, industry, and services. And we look at what the projected sector growth rates are. And based on historical relationships, we predict what might happen to employment in these three sectors. Then we have a new distribution of employment. Based on that, we predict what the earned incomes would be. So this is wages, salaries, profits, and earnings. And then we adjust those using the wage indices published by the central bank. So for public sector wages are adjusted by the public sector wage index. Others are adjusted by the informal sector wage index. We also take into account income from transfers. So these are not always well captured in household surveys. And certainly a lot has changed in this area since 2019. So first we simulated the expansion in Samurthi and now the expansion in Aswasuma. So both of these are in our current estimates. Since real data on this doesn't exist, we estimated these based on the existing relationship between household characteristics and eligibility, or the predicted relationship in case of Aswasuma. And we also modeled the expanded coverage and the different benefit amounts. Similarly, foreign remittances are taken into account. We take the macro data that's published by the central bank and distribute it across households who say they're reporting remittances. So this gives us an updated set of incomes for the whole country. So we have a new distribution of incomes. And then based on that, we create a new distribution of household expenditures, which is what we use to measure poverty. Now, an important step at this point is to take into account inflation. So much of the immediate impact of the crisis happened through a huge cost of living shock. So what we do is we basically take that into account through a household level inflation rate, and that shifts the entire distribution to the left. So people who were in the middle class get into the lower middle class, people who are in the lower middle class fall into poverty. To give you a sense of how big the shock was relative to 2021, in 2022, the median poor household experienced an increase in the cost of their consumption bundle, what they were buying in 2021, to the extent of 66%. So, Derek talked about the loss in real wages of a decline of 25%, but that was accompanied by an increase in the cost of what they would normally have purchased by 66%. So it shouldn't come as a shock to see these big numbers on the tripling of poverty. Now, but it's important also to say what's not modeled, right? Because not everything fits into a nice monetary framework. There are also necessary compromises that households have to make in terms of what they spend on health, on education, surely welfare improving expenditures. And these are not modeled, but thankfully there has been good monitoring from the Sri Lankan government itself. But that shows quite evidently that there's been a big impact on child nutrition outcomes, stunting, food security, so all of these. So the picture has to be understood not just by looking at the numbers, but also some of these other correlates. So let me stop there. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Nandini, for these insights, and thanks a lot also for outlining the approach that the World Bank has been using to estimate recent poverty estimates. I think it will be also very interesting to see how those estimates then compare with the PRIDE estimates that are coming out. And thanks a lot for all your work, and especially also the contribution, because your work has also influenced our PRIDE survey. Now, related to poverty, that brings me to questions related to the situation of food insecurity and malnutrition. And my question here goes to Gerard, to WFP. A recent WFP report finds that about a quarter of the Sri Lankan population were affected by moderate or severe food insecurity in August 2023. Malnutrition, especially among young children, remains to be widespread. The Nutrition Month report of the Selected Committee of the Sri Lanka's Parliament, which was released in September this year, suggests that child malnutrition even increased from 2022 to 2023, so after perhaps the main hit of the economic crisis. Yet, there also seem to be some data and evidence gap on key food and nutrition security issues. So specifically, my question is, how do you see the evolution of the food and nutrition security situation in Sri Lanka in the recent years, and what does WFP do to support the government to combat food insecurity and malnutrition? Over to you, Gerard.
Thanks, Olivier. Thanks for the question. Indeed, the past few years, Sri Lanka has faced significant challenges in food and nutrition security, mainly due to the economic crisis and, of course, other factors. At the onset of the crisis in May 2022, 28% of the households were reported as food insecure, and this is based on the joint FAO and WFP crop and food security assessment. By March 2023, there was some improvement with food security reducing to 17%, food insecurity reducing to 17%. However, our household surveys done about a year ago, last year between August and October, showed a slight increase again in food insecurity to 24%. When comparing the COVID-19 period to the economic crisis, we observed that the latter had a much bigger impact. As mentioned by Derek and Nandini, the hardest hit households were those dependent on social protection, pensions, unskilled labor, or daily wage work. The estate sector in particular were particularly affected, with about 42% of the households food insecure in 2023. That being said, there has been some improvement in food security, but many households still resort to food coping strategies, such as skipping meals, skipping protein in their meals, the elders of the household eating less, and unfortunately, women eating last. Whilst food inflation has dropped to the below 2 to 3%, it is a positive trend, but this is coming from the already high prices which we saw during the crisis. Again, as mentioned by Derek and Nandini, ongoing household economic challenges, low purchasing power, and vulnerabilities to shocks continue to impact food security. On the nutrition side, again, undernutrition remains a significant concern, particularly in rural and marginalized communities, where socioeconomic disparities limit access to nutritious food and essential services. As you mentioned, according to the Nutrition Month Summary Report of 2024, for children under 5, there's been an improvement in wasting, which decreased to 9.3% from 10% in 2023. But among school children, the condition is a bit concerning, particularly in wasting, which has risen significantly from 21 to 26.8%. In addition to undernutrition, Sri Lanka is also faces the challenge of issues with micronutrient deficiencies, particularly among vulnerable populations such as children and pregnant women. These deficiencies contribute to a range of health problems, including stunted growth, impaired cognitive development, further exacerbating the country's overall nutrition insecurity. Compounding these challenges are economic and environmental factors, including the fluctuating food prices, reduced agricultural productivity, and of course, the lingering effects of local and global disruptions. These have placed a significant strain on the households, making it harder for many to maintain consistent access to nutritious and diverse diets. Whilst there has been signs of good progress in certain areas, such as the expansion of the targeted nutrition programs, the broader context actually underscores the need for comprehensive, multi-sectoral approach to build resilience, reduce inequalities, and ensure sustainable nutrition. And as with the BRIGHT survey focuses on multi-sectoral, inputs to the survey, I think this would be useful to understand the main drivers behind some of these issues related, particularly from a WFP point of view, towards food security. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Gerard, and thanks also a lot for already touching on the impacts on nutrition and nutrition outcomes. This brings me to Renuka. Renuka, you are a professor of applied nutrition and also a member of our IFPRI Sri Lanka project team. So as Derek and also Gerard has pointed out, the economic crisis had severe impacts on nutrition, perhaps mostly on child nutrition, but I think it also went beyond child nutrition. Also, Derek has pointed out we have seen huge food price inflation that reached up to 80% in 2022. Households had to cope with large losses in real incomes, and the traditionally strong public health sector in Sri Lanka has experienced major disruptions. So maybe you can share a little bit more insights on the nutritional situation of the population, especially from your perspective as somebody who analyzes nutrition data intensively. And perhaps if I may add, we know that malnutrition, as also Gerard has pointed out, it is a multi-sectoral problem. So how do you think that an integrated household survey like the IFPRI survey can lay the foundation for identifying multi-sectoral solutions to the malnutrition problem in Sri Lanka? Over to you, Renuka.
Thank you for that, the important question or questions. As the speakers mentioned, so we had the economic crisis. Actually, we are having this the economic crisis and its after effects. The impact of these shocks on people's nutritional status is very profound, and it's a multifaceted situation. For instance, during economic downturns, we see families shifting to cheaper, calorie-dense and less nutritious food. That leads to increased rate of malnutrition, both undernutrition as well as obesity. So we have to consider the both sides. The first, as Derek mentioned, that food price inflation reached the highest as 80% in 2022. That made nutritious food like fresh vegetables, fruits, milk, and especially the protein-rich foods unaffordable for many families. When money is tight, people tend to prioritize calories over nutrients. That leads to diets dominated by staples like rice. So rice prices also increase. So then there are a lot of changes happen in the day-to-day dietary behavior. Second, there's a sharp drop in the real income, as it was mentioned here. That has left many households unable to meet even their basic food needs. So families are skipping meals, eating less, or turning to cheaper, less nutritious alternatives. So this has a direct impact on nutritional status, particularly the vulnerable population groups such as children, pregnant women, and also elderly, who are always and already vulnerable to nutritional deficiencies. So micronutrient deficiencies were also highlighted already before this crisis. The Medical Research Institute reports showed that Sri Lanka has iron deficiency and vitamin A deficiency, or particularly the anemia. So I think this the situation worsened the anemia situation, that will weaken the immunity of the children, and also that can cause poor health outcomes. So we shouldn't forget about the chronic diseases. Urban populations, especially, they reliant on the inexpensive processed foods face increased risk of diet-related non-communicable diseases such as diabetes, hypertension due to high sugar, salt, fat consumption, and they reduce the consumption, as I Yes, and according to some of the results that we have recently collected, the fruits and vegetable consumption is very low, and of course, the animal source of food consumption is very low. So there was another disruption happened very importantly in the public health services. So that's a cornerstone of Sri Lanka's strong healthcare system, as Derek mentioned. And the situation has worsened the situation, the previous situation, and very essential nutrition intervention programs such as school meal schemes, maternal and child nutrition initiatives, and access to fortified supplements such as Triposha has been scaled back or delayed of that can further increase the risk of malnutrition. So there's a question about how can we give some insight to these problems through BRIGHT survey. So malnutrition isn't just about food, and it is influenced by many other factors like health, education, income, even infrastructure. So the BRIGHT survey gathers detailed household data across these areas. I think that can give clear picture of how these factors interact. For example, it helps us to see the rising food prices and poor maternal education and healthcare access gaps combined to worsen malnutrition. That's the important thing in BRIGHT. And also, I think we can identify the vulnerable groups, those who are in different regions. So this is not just looking at the national averages, but looking at the regional and the social disparities, like how malnutrition rates differ by income groups, rural versus urban areas, or the maternal education. So that will allow us to target programs in future. Perhaps the output may help us to design programs, for example, a food assistance program in Monragala or the nutrition education in urban schools, whatever. So the policymakers and the program implementers and designers can use the BRIGHT survey data in future for these things. Lastly, I just want to mention that it's very important to understand that malnutrition solutions need teamwork. So the data from BRIGHT can bridge the sectors, helping agriculture, education, and health departments to work together. Unfortunately, as a university academic and researcher, still I believe that in this country, there is no such an integrated approach in addressing malnutrition. So for example, if the stakeholders carefully look at the data that we are going to gather through BRIGHT, they can align agriculture policies with school nutrition programs. So that could ensure the kids not only get meals, but also nutritious, locally grown ones. So I think BRIGHT Sri Lanka survey provide very good evidence base for designing multi-sectoral solutions, and ultimately we expect that will enhance the effectiveness of interventions to reduce malnutrition in this country. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Renuka, and we are really grateful for you being on the team and sharing your experience and your insights also to this survey. Before I come to our next panelist, I would like to remind the audience, please share your questions with us either through the Q&A function or the chat function. Both of those toggles you find at the bottom of your screen. For Zoom, you see in the middle part, in the middle section, the second from the right is the chat function, and the second from the left is the Q&A function. Nisha, over to you. My question opens up the topic a little bit and talks more about perhaps what can be done about the current situation in Sri Lanka and how we move forward. So the new government of Sri Lanka is faced with a large and urgent reform agenda, especially for initiating structural transformation and promoting inclusive economic growth, where the agriculture sector obviously will likely play a pivotal role. There's a strong hope that policymakers will use scientific evidence and seek expert advice to make sound policy decisions. From your perspective as the Director of Research of ISS, which is, as I pointed out before, the leading economic think tank in Sri Lanka, what are some of the critical economic questions that require urgent policy attention, but for which relevant scientific evidence is scant? Nisha, you're muted.
Okay.
Here we go. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you, Oliver, for that question. And I should remind, I'm the Director of Research at the Institute of Policy Studies, not ISS, IPS. But regarding the question, as you very correctly, as pointed out by Derek at the beginning, so we went through this economic crisis, and I think the households still remain under a lot of economic pressure. The food insecurity is widespread and very low health and education outcomes. And we also see that the labor force participation is declining. So as many of you know very well, that one way to ensure inclusive growth is to provide decent job opportunities to people. So if you look at the labor market in Sri Lanka, you can see that it's what is needed is not just any job. You need good jobs. When I say good jobs, I mean jobs that pay well and jobs that come with social security, and jobs where you can earn a decent wage working normal working hours, because sometimes you have to work very long hours to be able to earn enough to sustain your family. So if you look at those kind of jobs in Sri Lanka, it's very, recently we did an analysis. It's only about 6.3% of the jobs in the country are formal sector jobs where people can earn decent wages. So when I say decent wages, it means at least the minimum wages. So, and most of these jobs are available for highly skilled workers. And these jobs are specially limited outside the urban sector, and especially the estate areas, very limited jobs. So one question that needed urgent attention is how to create good jobs for low-skilled workers living in rural areas. And I'm actually very excited about the BRIGHT survey in this regard, because I feel that this is a question that you can answer using the information available, because as very correctly said by Derek, some of these problems are not one-dimensional. So many different things come together to create this problem. So it's good that we'll be able to look at it from a lot of different dimensions, a lot of different angles. So if you look at sector-wise jobs, we have very good jobs with very high wages in some sectors like the financial sector, ICT sector, or in the professional services like health and education in the public sector. But again, those jobs are available only for highly skilled workers. But what we find is majority of the low skilled workers. So I have the number here, about outside the Western province, more than 30% of the employment are in the agriculture sector. And you find about 83% of agricultural workers are low-skilled workers. They have not even finished their secondary education. Well, for these kind of people, it is in the short term, it's not possible to direct them to these good quality jobs in the public sector or in these sectors like the ICT or the financial sector. the main way for them to earn a decent living is by improving the productivity in the agricultural sector, and then connecting them with urban markets and maybe also export markets so that they can earn higher wages. Now, if you look at the policies in Sri Lanka, agricultural policies, I mean, there's been many, many policies. We are very good at creating policies, and some of them are implemented also, but there are, I mean, all these political uncertainties that we've had over the past several years, you know, policy implementation has also been very slow. So, because if you look at the agricultural sector, we've had 8 ministers in the last 10 years, and some of them, like most of them have not even lasted a year. So it's, you know, in that kind of uncertainty, it's very difficult to implement policies. But what we don't know is what policies worked, what didn't, why they didn't work. So where should we invest more money? So all these unanswered questions are out there. And on top of all that, we have the climate-related issues, also complicating matters in the rural agricultural sector, because the farmers are no longer able to resort to their traditional knowledge to decide on crops, decide on what to grow and how to grow them, because the climate change is really affecting them, and there are also water shortages. So we really don't know what is not allowing this rural agricultural sector to improve the productivity so that the rural people can improve their earnings and thereby also help their families and education and nutrition and all of that. So I'm actually very hopeful that the BRIGHT survey might allow us to find some answers to these critical questions that are out there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nisha, and thanks a lot, especially for pointing out those key questions that are out there. And I think especially your question, which relates to policy, which policies are working, why they are working, and which one are not working, and why they are not working, is an important question, especially in a structural transformation process as Sri Lanka is going through. And we are absolutely delighted for this collaboration with the Institute of Policy Studies, IPS. And sorry for my misspeaking. And we are very much looking forward to continue our collaboration with you and your colleagues. Now, Nisha, you mentioned already agriculture, but I would like now to come to Delaney. Delaney, you are an agriculture economist and you are a lecturer and researcher at the University of Peradeniya, Sri Lanka, which is one of the preeminent universities for agriculture research. Now, you're also a member of the Pride Sri Lanka project team, and you have lots of experience in agriculture research in Sri Lanka. Now, Sri Lanka's agriculture has been through some turbulent times, to say the least. My question for you is, can you briefly describe to us some of the main challenges of the agriculture sector, and perhaps specifically of smallholder farmers and agriculture workers? Now, I would like to also invite you to touch upon the somewhat unique agriculture estate subsector, which is perhaps a little bit unfamiliar to some of our colleagues around the world. Delaney.
Thank you, Olivier. So I see 3 parts to your question. One on the challenges faced by the agricultural sector and the smallholder specifically, and then about the estate sector, right? Now, about the challenges faced by the agricultural sector, mainly I would say, if I prioritize, it would be the challenge to increase the productivity. Our agriculture sector has been the largest user of our limited land resource, we being an island. So there's an increasing demand from other sectors for this resource. So there is increasing pressure for agriculture sector to be more productive. And also for to generate more income for the for those who are employed in this sector. The sector has to be more productive than this, definitely. And then the second most important challenge would be to become more competitive as a sector that can cater to the export market. The export market demands are different. They are demanding value-added products. They are demanding more quality products. But tapping the export market potential is very important because that is where the scale economies for a small economy like Sri Lanka lies, and also that is where the premiums are. So that has been the challenge, and I would see that is a huge challenge that we should face immediately. And another important challenge would be the insufficient investments in our research and development in agricultural sector. Now, if we compare countries like Thailand and Vietnam, there are new products, there are value-added products in the agricultural sector has given them a high leeway in processed food market in the world. So compared to such countries, there is a very poor investment in R&D in the agricultural sector. So that has been a challenge. And also, I would say, given our government setup, which has been for all these decades, aligning public investments, the infrastructure and the regulation setup with the requirements of the private sector, and to align them so that that facilitates competitive markets has been a challenge ever. So to move forward in the agricultural sector, I would say that Sri Lanka has to find ways to face these challenges and move forward. And the second part of the question is about the smallholder farmer, the challenges faced by a smallholder farmer and the agricultural worker. So farming income has been or has becoming inadequate for a decent living. So the farmers are required to diversify their livelihoods. And another reason for that is the farming income has been erratic because of the climate change and because of the seasonality, other inherent attributes of the agricultural sector. So while for rural people, for their livelihoods, for their decent living, the diversification is important. There's, as Dr. Nisha mentioned, the rural, especially farming labor is less skilled. They are very poorly skilled. So the diversification opportunities or the capacity to capitalize on those opportunities are very poor among our smallholder farmers. So these have been challenges, and also their inability to connect with the markets. There have been lack of opportunities, lack of infrastructure for them to connect, lack of information. So these have been challenges faced by our smallholder farmer and agricultural workers specifically. And the third part of the question about the estate sector, and Olivia, I'm really glad that you mentioned estate sector in Sri Lanka. So for the international audience, especially, I would like to say that Sri Lanka we classify the economy in Sri Lanka into three categories or three sectors as urban, rural, and estate sector. So this division is a unique phenomenon to the Sri Lankan context, I would say. So this sector predominantly consists of plantation workers, historically with a South Indian origin during the colonial times. So in terms of population, we are talking about less than a million, about 900,000 people, comprising about 4 to 5% of the population. So in terms of population size, this might seem as a small sector. Yet, they represent very important pockets of poverty in Sri Lanka. Like if we compare the poverty rates, we know rural poverty is higher than the urban poverty, but poverty in the estate sector is even worse. So if more than 50% of the estate population is living below poverty line, and that is about 14% of the poor population in Sri Lanka. So therefore, in terms of society, in terms of social well-being, societal well-being, and in terms of economic well-being, studying about the estate sector is very important. And we shouldn't forget that estate sector population provide labor for our plantation sector, which is mainly tea and rubber, which are the largest export earning crops for Sri Lanka. So looking after this population and improving their welfare is important.
Yes, Delini, thank you so much, and we are really pleased to have you on the team and thankful for this great collaboration. I would like now to invite Derek and Joanna to join the panel, and I would like now to address a couple of questions that we got in through the various channels to our speakers. So my first question goes to Derek. Derek, during your presentation, you talked about the evidence gap in policymaking and the importance of not just creating data and evidence, but getting it into the hands of policymakers and other groups. And I also believe that you touched upon your certain proposal for a policy dialogue series that you envision. Can you tell us a little bit more about these ideas?
Yeah, thank you, Olivia. That's a very important question, I think. There are many instances in other countries where I've seen, wonderful surveys carried out, such as in Bangladesh. They had a national nutrition surveillance project. But one of the main complaints was, the data wasn't used, accessed. It wasn't really influencing policy except in specific instances like national disaster preparedness or responses. So it's really important to make sure that the data is used. And as I said, kind of in my opening remarks, I think Sri Lanka is a case where there's a real disconnect, not only between policymakers and academia, which Professor Silva mentioned, but also between the public sector and the private sector, right? So take agriculture, for example. Agriculture is carried out pretty much 100% by the private sector. But the role of the private sector, let's not say just in policymaking, but in having an opportunity to be part of the dialogue in agricultural policymaking is very limited. So we need sort of policy dialogues through whatever fora, through in-person fora, through webinars, through committees, etc., that bring together policymakers from the government, but also the private sector, civil society, and academics, and scientists, as well as international experts. So we have to think about how to do that. Certainly for the Bright survey, we're thinking we'll hold, very regular hybrid webinars, seminars to disseminate certain results and really try to make sure that high-level policymakers are there and senior government officials, as well as private sector and other groups, because it's really critical to have a more open dialogue in Sri Lankan policymaking. Thank you.
Thanks, Derek. Joanna, we have here a question in the chat. This question comes from Himisiri Kodagama, and it goes, what improvement on data does the PRIDE survey brings over the recent UNDP survey? Can you shed light on this one?
Sure, and maybe just building on what Derek was talking about, one of the key things that we're trying to do with our survey is to make it publicly available immediately. So that's something that we would share it with the broader research community so that the universities within Sri Lanka can be using this data to inform their master's and PhD theses. And therefore, we're building a research community within Sri Lanka. On top of that, the UNDP survey, of course, it's very important, and building on surveys, we can continue to learn more. But this survey is focused on the multidimensional vulnerability index. So our survey is much broader. We have a very detailed agricultural module looking at agricultural productivity. We have a detailed fishing module looking at fishing income and productivity. So our survey is really focused on livelihoods, employment, and understanding poverty, and all these dimensions really that we've been talking about today in the seminar. The last thing I'll say is that we also have a representative estate sector, which is something that the UNDP survey did not.
Thanks, Jana. So one question that is really of special interest to many of us, and which we haven't touched upon, relates to social protection. And here, maybe perhaps Nisha or Nandini can answer this question. So my question is, how does social protection influence household resilience during the economic crisis? And is there any evidence from Sri Lanka experience that is also reflected in this survey? I think especially when it comes to social protection and how that helped or not helped during the crisis, maybe Nandini or Nisha could be the person and to answer this one, and perhaps on then how it reflects in the survey, either Derek or also Delaney. We got this question in through another channel. Maybe I'll start with you, Nisha.
Yeah, thank you. So as I was telling, talking about decent work, so if you have in the formal sector, in Sri Lanka, a lot of the social protection is channeled through employment. So if you have formal employment, you have some kind of social protection. But outside of that, you have the poor households getting cash transfers from the government. But a lot of the low income groups who are not in the formal sector is left out of this. So they are the ones who are not covered by any kind of social protection other than the health services, which is available for everybody. So if they don't work, they don't have any wages, and if they are sick and they are not earning, then they don't have an income. So these are the critical problems, and this is also one reason why we need to think of ways to create those quality jobs. It's very important because a lot of the social protection is channeled through employment.
Thanks, Nisha. So my understanding is, Nandini, that you have been working quite a bit on social protection, including in Sri Lanka. Can you share some thoughts, please?
Sure, thanks. So I think there's a couple of things. So first, I think we should all be a little pragmatic and perhaps in our expectations of what any government can do in the current fiscal situation, right? So budgets will remain constrained from the government side for some time, right? And that's important. It's important that they do the fiscal consolidation to stabilize the economy and get the economy back on track. That being said, there's certainly room for improvement in the fiscal side. So I'll talk a little bit more broadly, going beyond social protection too. So because these fiscal instruments include both taxes as well as transfers. And Nisha rightly said that on the transfer side, there's a public expenditure on health, on education. There is the sort of insurance, job security, and those aspects that come through formal employment. And then there is a system of cash transfers that is still going through an ongoing process of reform. So on that, there's certainly scope for improving social protection, particularly the cash transfers, I would say. So there has been a reform to try and make the criteria for selection much more objective. In principle, the budget should cover the poorest 40% of the population. But there's room to improve the targeting to make it more effective. There's room to expand the coverage of the registry to make sure that certain districts which may be undercovered are covered. There's room to improve grievance redressal. And those will be getting more bang for your buck because the budget for that is kind of allocated. And if you reach more of those who need it the most, then your money is better spent. On the tax side, there have been a lot of improvements in terms of improving compliance, removing loopholes, and generally all of these, the changes in the direct taxes, as well as the changes on the transfer side have been progressive. What has hit the poor sort of more harder have been the necessary sort of changes in fuel prices, in sort of removing the subsidy element on prices on fuel, prices of electricity. Now, the government has had to do that, but this has come as a sort of a big shock to the household budget, right? And that has caused that requires some compensation to think through how that reform is done more carefully.
Thanks.
And sorry, one last point.
Absolutely.
Just on indirect taxes. So many governments across the world tend then to start to rely on VAT and GST, right? But that's a tax on consumption. And in an economy that you're trying to sort of bring back to life, taxing household consumption, I think Derek had that in one of his slides from the Sri Lanka development update, you see that private household consumption has not yet picked up. And so when you tax consumption at a time when incomes are low, then it's hard for that multiplier to start to work and for the economy to get restarted. So thanks, I'll stop there.
Thanks a lot. And yes, I would also like to mention that the PRIDE survey does cover social protection. So we will have 22 objective indicators in there, including many of those aspects that you have mentioned, Nandini. But maybe now over to Gerard. Gerard, my understanding is that WFP is very much interested in the impacts of social protection, especially on food security. Can you share some insights from WFP experience very briefly?
Yeah, hi Olivier. Yes, indeed. Food security and social protection go hand in hand, and we've been working closely with the Ministry of Education in terms of the school meals program. We've supported the government, particularly during the economic crisis. We ensured the school meals program ran when there were fiscal difficulties, ensuring there was fortified rice and lentils available for the school meals program. In addition, we also support the Triposha program. Again, during the economic crisis, we ensured that program continued by bringing in maize and soybean towards that program. Going forward, we continue to advocate for fortified rice in the school meals, as mentioned by the speakers, to address the challenges of micronutrients. We also working with the WBB and the Samruddhi on the empowerment program, hereby again targeting the most vulnerable, and then finally again social protection linked to disaster risk reduction and shock responsive social protection. We are making the linkages between the disaster agencies and the social protection sector to look at those communities who are potentially vulnerable also to climate shocks, which is where we bring in anticipatory actions too. So yes, for us, social protection is integral, whether it's on the nutrition side or on the food security side.
Thanks very much, Gerard. So with that concludes our expert panel discussion. I would like to thank our panelists very much for their excellent insights. Please give them a virtual hand of applause. And I would also like to thank Joanna and Derek for their presentation and weighing in here. With that, I would like to hand over to Joe Ballier for his concluding remarks. We started 4 minutes late, so we will also end a couple of minutes later. Jean, the final words are with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Olivier, and most of all, thank you to everyone. Thank you to the presenters for excellent presentations and to the panelists for incredible insights. From what we heard and discussed, it is clear to me that the potential of this project to tackle critical issues around poverty, inequalities, resilience, nutrition, and many more challenges is fascinating. So I hope that we will be able to, that's my first point, be able to build some momentum around this project based on this webinar and beyond. What are the takeaways? What are the salient points and what we've learned? So it is still, of course, as you said, Joanna and Derek, this is still an early stage, and we are learning, you know, only what we can from the process at this point, not yet from the survey results, but I think we're already learning a lot. And my takeaways, I cannot be too long because we don't have time, but I think we have actually accumulated a lot of very useful information today. One key point for me relates to what was said several times, the tremendous difficulty of recovering. It is, you know, quite easy, unfortunately, to go down, to see that the economic crisis can lead to a disastrous situation, but it takes a lot more to recover. And so this underscores the challenge of rebuilding and recovering from such crises. And I think for us researchers, it is all about, you know, trying to understand what can be done to accelerate recovery and how to rebuild, you know, after shock. What are the policy levers for that? And investments, of course. Very clear points on the crucial roles of, say, social safety nets, the role that we have not explored enough, but certainly there was some insight about that. The agricultural and food sector as a safety net in itself and a source of resilience, and in particular in terms of crisis and after. So how to leverage that even more. And last point for me is what is also very clear from what many of you have said is the need to understand that to face complex issues and complex situations, we need more and better data. And this means more sophisticated and better surveys. It goes without, you know, saying that it also has cost consequences. So it is very important for us as a community to understand that in order to generate better evidence for better policies, we actually need to invest more upfront on things that are sometimes seen or perceived as not so visible, so tangible. In terms of next steps, and that's the final point for me, it is really important to try to, as I said at the beginning, to unleash the full potential of this BRIGHT project. I believe that from the audience, it was quite clear that many would be excited to be involved. We already have a broad partnership, and I think it would be very, very opportune to see how we can interact more with the BRIGHT team, how we could share some thoughts on maximizing the project's potential, also to suggest angles to make sure that we will have the best approaches to make the data speak as it is released, share views about the dimensions that will need to be explored further to answer the needs, demands, expectations of our local partners in particular. And so building momentum around that, I think is fundamental. And I like this type of project, of course, because it emphasizes cooperation. It emphasizes evidence-based solutions, science. These are values at a time where, on a global scale, these are also challenged. And so, in closing, I want to highlight the value of this partnership today. I want to thank the IFPRI team for their excellent work. and for securing this strong partnership with international partners, including the International Water Management Institute, IMI, but also with several Sri Lankan institutions, including locally the representation of the World Bank, the WFP, but also local institutions, IPS, PEP, University of Peradeniya, the University of Wayamba, and also my University of Origin, of course, I cannot miss that, University of Göttingen, and I think in collaboration with the University of Florence. So this is fantastic to see such a broad partnership provide valuable intellectual support, providing new insights, and also in addition to skilled workforce. And I think this gives us a very strong sense of ownership. And so I look forward to strengthening these collaborations in the framework of this BRIGHT project and beyond in whatever CGIAR could do to support. Thank you very much, Olivier and team, and all the best for the future of this project.
Thank you, Jean, very much for your kind and important words. With that, I wish you a good rest of the day, a good evening, or a good night, especially to our colleagues in Sri Lanka.